All right, so this is just a quick video to talk about discussion board number 4. So number 4, I basically have you make a display of a relationship between two variables, and I've broken down what the different types of displays you can use are. So I'm just going to pull up a data set and I'll play around with some of those. The first one, it says categorical versus categorical. So I don't have that in this particular data set. So let me come over here. So we have, in this particular data set, is from last semester, I had students looking at GPA versus where you sat in the class, like front, middle, or back. So we're looking at categorical, where you sit, and then they put GPA into ranges, so it's also categorical. And here it says that we should be using a split or a stacked bar chart. So we're going to try this out. So I want to do a graph. I'm going to do a bar plot, because it's a bar chart, right, with data. And this is where you choose whatever you're going to look at. Now, if you just choose both the things that you want to see, where you sit and let's say GPA, which I just press the control button to get them both over here. If I press compute, it's going to give me two separate bar charts, which is not particularly useful. So what you really want to do is you want to choose just one of your variables over here. So I don't even know how to undo that. Okay, so where you sit in the classroom, or let's say GPA. And then you want to choose a grouping by. So here's where you can choose your other variables. So if GPA is my column, where I sit in the class, where I sit in the classroom could be my grouping. And then we have lots of group options. I can split, I can stack, or I can separate the graph for each group. I personally think a stacked or segmented bar chart is really the quickest and easiest way to see if there's a relationship. So I like that one a lot. So I'm going to use a stacked bar chart, GPA, where you sit in the classroom, and I'm going to press compute. And now I can see the different GPAs, where those people sit in the classroom. Now, one thing is, for me, I always get these two mixed up. Like here, I kind of really wanted to see the back, middle, and front as the big bars, and then to see the GPA breakdown within each of those. So I'm going to go back, and I'm going to go ahead and do where you sit and group, and then do the grouping by GPA. So you can play around with this and decide. We might expect that students in the front would have the largest group of yellow, right? And if you look proportionally, it almost looks like that might be the case. And I can play around with this more too. If I want to, I can come in here, and it actually has the ability for me to do this instead of as a frequency, as a relative frequency within the category. So sort of looking at those conditionals. So this will even it out, because if we look at our original graph, the vast majority sat in the middle and the front, and there weren't very many that sat in the back who did this survey. So if I do relative frequency, now it shows how big each of the bars are all 1. So it's doing this out of the number of people. And you can actually see the group that has the biggest proportion of our high scores is actually the students who sit in the back of the classroom, followed by the front and the middle. But if you look at the front of the classroom, those students, they also have the smallest group of people who are in the lowest GPA range. So it's kind of interesting, and these are just lots of different ways you can look at this graph. None of them are like better than any other one. So I could have left it as frequency. I could have even done the split bar chart. Like, these are all just different ways of looking at it. So in the split bar chart, I can see in the back of the classroom, the biggest group is the 3.6 to 4s. Oops, I didn't mean to make that peak. Whereas in the front and the middle, the biggest group are the 3.1s to 3.5s, which is another cool story. So just trying to get you an idea of things that you can play around with. The nice thing about StatCrunch is it's super easy to go back into the options and just redo your graph in a different way and see if a different story pops up to you. So that was categorical to categorical. I'm going to keep doing this. Categorical versus quantitative is our next one. So in this case, we could look at age versus where you sit in the classroom. Maybe we have a belief that the older you are, the more likely you are to sit towards the front of the classroom or something like that. So if I wanted to look at this, you can see it tells us the best way is to do a box plot. So really, we go into our graph. We're going to go to box plot. And if we go to box plot, I'm going to look at age, because that's the thing I was talking about, and I'm going to group by my categorical. So grouping by categorical, we said this would be where you sit in the classroom. So is there a relationship between the age and where you sit? And you can see it's going to go ahead, it's going to plot a group for each column, or plot columns for each group. This could be good. I personally like the outliers identified, and I like to have my boxes horizontal. This is just a personal preference. But again, you can play around with all these options, unclicking and clicking, and seeing what looks best. So where you sit in the classroom, we have outliers on the high end in terms of age for every group. And what I thought would be true is actually true. If you look at the front of the classroom, our median is higher than it is for the other two categories. In the back of the classroom, we have the lowest median. The youngest students are sitting in the back, where on average, the older students are sitting in the front. And we do have outliers on all of these categories of people who are older and sit in each of the different places. So again, we can look at the relationship and see what's going on, this time between a categorical and a quantitative variable. So the last thing I want to talk about is quantitative versus quantitative. And unfortunately, this group here, years in college, ends up more as a categorical because they have this plus mark. And even if it didn't have the plus mark, this is still a bunch of like ones and twos. It's better in this case to treat this as a category, where each, an ordinal categorical variable. So I'm not going to look at Lindsay and Michelle, Morgan, and Starsh's data anymore. I'm going to switch over and look at the group from Donald and Brad and all them from last semester and their data. So they were looking at credits that were taken, hours of sleep, hours working, and then their major. So here we have some nice quantitative variables, hours of sleep and work hours. If you want to know if those two things are related, this is actually something we're going to go over in part 3 at the very beginning. We could do what's called a scatter plot. So again, we're going into graph, and this time scatter plot. You might want to choose which you think influences the other as your X. So if you think there's an explanatory variable here, like the number of hours I work might explain how much sleep I get, you want to set it up that way. And then you can just press compute. And you'll get a scatter plot. This scatter plot doesn't really show any sort of trend here, right? With the person who's getting the least sleep has 0 hours of work, the person getting the most sleep has 40 hours of work. This is probably the opposite of what we'd expect, and it looks like it's kind of all over the place. What you'd really hope with a nice trend is some sort of relationship, like a line that you could actually see sort of forming. So those are your 3 different types of displays that you can look at. And if you want help interpreting them, you can always chat with me, talk to Jackie or Mary Lou, depending on what class you're in. These are all I know that sometimes it's a little difficult to know what is this telling me. And a lot of the time you're going to find that there isn't a relationship there. And so you'll get something out that looks like this. It's not very useful or helpful to talk about. All right, so that's it. Those are the 3 types.